What's up, Laker fans? Welcome to the Laker Film Room Podcast. I'm Pete, joined by Darius. And today I want to do the first of several season previews for Lakers players and kind of what we expect from them in training camp this upcoming season on Austin Reaves. Now, Austin is a guy where the course of our conversation mostly this summer, D, has been about, we just got from not working with the Lakers, we couldn't talk about player transactions all that specifically for so long that once we were able to, there was a certain amount of, all right, we can talk about trades and things like that. And so our discussions about Austin have been very much like Austin within the context of team building and as a trade asset. And he's been the Lakers' third best playoff player for 2 seasons in a row and makes less than everybody except for Gabe and Vando in terms of the guys that make, over 10 million. And just kind of isn't the place that I think you start in terms of, hey, how do we improve the team? Now, do I think he's untradeable? No, we've gone over all of this. But that isn't really an exploration of his game. And I thought last season was kind of a tale of 2 seasons. And that's been kind of a theme throughout Austin's basketball career, at least starting in college. You pointed out a couple of pods ago that when he was at Wichita State, he was more of an off-ball player, whereas when he went to Oklahoma, he was more of an on-ball player. His first couple seasons with the Lakers, that was true as well. He was mostly an off-ball player and kind of a dirty work guy. Remember how much he'd get hit in the face and he would take charges and things like that. And he'd get the ball, once he started getting playing time, he'd get the ball like once or twice a game and would do something great with it, like a high percentage of the time. And I remember I'd be like, yo, we should maybe give this guy the ball a little bit more. And he has good playoff run throughout the Western Conference Finals in 23, gets his contract, goes overseas and plays for Team USA, plays well, has Manila chanting his name. The fans are going nuts, right? He was the mayor of Manila. And one of the things that I remember, I wish I could post it, but I can't, but there was this hilarious exchange between Austin and LeBron in the locker room in a preseason game or early in the season where Austin had just gone on Jimmy Kimmel, right? So this is the first time Austin's really blown up, right? That's what happened last season. And he's explaining how nervous he was, and LeBron, who's done this a zillion times, is cracking up at Austin's story, right? And so Austin comes back, and the first part of the season, I hated how he played defense. And I thought that he was so much of the conversation was framed around, Taurean Prince, right? And all of the conversation with the lineup, and appropriately so. But part of why it was as bad as it was because Austin was playing the worst defense of his career. He was overhelping a ton. He wasn't, getting in there and taking charges and all of that. Now, I know there was the stuff about his legs being tired. To me, it's like you're 25. I don't know. I'm a little less sympathetic on that. But that, and then the second half of the season, now again with a more appropriate lineup for sure, but Austin, I thought, really turned it up and showed a lot of the player that he had been. So where are you at, D? I wanted to kind of set the context of Austin's career as we come into this season. I think this is a pivotal year in Austin's career.
So I agree. It's a pivotal year in Austin's career, and I expect him to play great. So I understand where you're coming from, like you're young. Austin had never really played a full season and then had a full summer's commitment. Austin is also a player who, I've talked about this before, but he has to play at like 90% hard.
Sure.
Almost all of the time in order to be like a good NBA player. And if he falls below a certain effort level, then he's sort of struggling to keep tread, right?
Yeah, other guys can more effectively cruise than somebody with his tools.
Yeah, it's always funny, right? Because if you're an NBA player, you're a great athlete, but there's obviously levels. There is LeBron level great athlete, and then there's somewhere all the way down there, and not all of the way down there, but Austin is not that level, right? And so there's a certain amount of commitment to playing hard all of the time, which other players just don't have that same requirement in order to be good on a play-to-play basis. But Austin has to. And I think part of what we saw at the beginning last season was am I ready to play hard all of the time when I just had the longest season of my life in terms of an NBA season? They went all the way to the conference finals. And then I had a summer commitment of Team USA where the guy who was really the last add to the roster became one of Steve Kerr's favorite children and got a lot of playing time in a way where it's just like, where not only was he playing extensive minutes for Team USA, I thought he was playing hard minutes because he was the guy getting targeted on defense a lot. So he was the guy having to hold up in the post and getting isolated at the top of the floor by Dennis Schroeder. And so I just wanted to contextualize it from the other side of things, where I know that you're being like, hey, he's young. And like, I see that side as well. And so like, you are an NBA player, you are a great athlete, like be ready. But the flip side is like, there's levels to being ready. And I don't think he was as prepared for the consequences of what 100-game NBA season with a summer of intense basketball might look like.
I think that's totally fair. And I just think that it's appropriate context when discussing he hadn't been the player early in that season that he had been the first 2 seasons of his career. Now, he was fundamentally being asked to do more on the ball. Remember, that developed toward the end of 23, of which the coming out party for that was game 1 against Memphis, where in a close game, LeBron's like, here, you've got the ball. He's like, I've got the ball, really? And that's something I think we'll talk about as the pod goes on. But Austin becoming kind of the one in the last 5 minutes of close games has been a development that's happened more and more. But that's a great talent to be like, oh, a good hustle glue guy the first couple of years of his career too. He was actually, his pick and roll ability really improved over the course of the season. And that was one thing where I thought there were some nights where he was in lineups where he was asked to do too much ball handling, be the only guy that was really that, and struggled with that early and did a little later, but was better at it, right? And so I thought, like, if nothing else came from last year, Austin got great on-ball reps that I think will be really helpful going forward. But I also think he's one of those guys, because he has that versatility, which is a great thing to have, especially at his salary, that he's a question mark for me, D, of like, what direction is Redick going to go with him? Because there's a version of the team where Austin plays more one, and we go a little bit bigger, whether the starting lineup or otherwise. And so to me, he's a swing player for like philosophically what Redick wants to do, because he's capable of different roles.
100%. And this is why I go back to the idea that I agree with you that this is such an important year for Austin, because the Lakers got eliminated in the first round. And this is really the first summer of Austin's career where there's a synergy between, I understand what being a high-ish level NBA player looks like over the course of an 82-game season and a playoff run. Like, I've now had 2 seasons to inform what my training habits should look like going into an opening season. He did not have any summer commitments. So, we saw him out there on the golf course and this, that, and the other. But he understands the work that needs to be put in order for him to play a 100-game season. And to me, Pete, and this is where I want to go to break, is there's a physical preparation that he needs to go through, but there's also a mental preparation that I think is just as critical to what his success is going to be. And that ties back into the stuff with Redick and what his role is going to be. So let's go to break here. And when we come back, I sort of want to drill in a little bit to that mental side. Part of the thing that I think is going to be super important for every Laker this upcoming season, but particularly those who have sort of on-ball ability, is understanding of decision-making on a play-to-play basis and how that should inform your preparation for what you're going to be in the course of a game. And if there was an area where I was most disappointed with Austin last season, it was this to start the season. He seemed to not be locked into what his role was going to be. And remember, like maybe 15, 20 games in, there started to be those reports about like, maybe disagreements with Darvin Ham and Austin.
Sure.
And
he was the first guy to the bench.
Yes, right. And so I thought his play-to-play decision-making was not to the standard that I expected from him very early on last season. And there's a part of being mentally locked in and mentally ready to sort of embrace what's asked of you. And maybe there was uncertainty in what the ask was going to be, or a certain amount of uncomfortability with what the ask was. And that's what led to some of the decision-making. But all of the overdriving, all of the penetration into like closed gaps, all of the turning my back and throwing the ball to nobody, and it's sort of just like, what are you doing, bro?
Yeah.
You're such you're so much smarter than this as a player. And so I kicked this idea back to you, Pete, in terms of like, he's now going into season, is it four for him? There's no more like, I don't know what this is. He's now seen almost every type of NBA coverage he's ever going to see, and seen all the types of defenses and all the different ways that teams can game plan against him. And he should also understand like the self-scouting of what other teams are trying to do to him. So to me, this is where the synergy of, okay, coach is going to put me in positions where I'm going to have to be a decision maker. What's my decision-making process look like, and how sharp am I going to be? So I kicked that idea back to you, Pete. Like, there's the physical preparation, but to me, how mentally locked in is he going to be? And what types of decisions do you think he's going to be asked to make within the context of the offense? Because I think that's going to be a key driver of his success if he can execute that part of his game at a high level.
I view his struggles, especially at the beginning of last season on the ball, as kind of a figuring out process of, it was his first time getting high volume on ball reps in the NBA from the beginning of the year. I do think there was an element of fatigue, right? I agree with it to a point. I'm less sympathetic about the defensive end than I am about this, because again, it's his first on ball reps. And then secondly, remember, I was like, this is kind of weird. The way we're running this 5-out is so ball screen heavy that a lot of people were driving into gaps to nowhere in single gaps and getting, the dig guy reaching in from one pass away while there's back pressure. And then there's help from the guy, the hedging big man right there, where it's like, these are roads to nowhere in a lot of possessions that a lot of players were doing that, with the exception of LeBron, that they got better at both calling their pick and rolls and varying that to the defense. That was a credit to the coaches. I thought they really improved that. But also, like, Austin started to figure it out. And that was the value, I think, of that part of the season and last year in a lot of ways, that Austin has a level of on-ball ability now that he didn't at the beginning of last year, precisely because he went through it the way that he did. I think that being mentally locked in, a lot of times that's the mental aspect of fatigue. And so if you want to argue that he was fried a little bit from the Olympics and didn't come out of the gates very well, I think a lot of times we see this with LeBron, right? Where you can see LeBron getting a little tired. His stance becomes more upright. He'll be a little sloppier with the ball. Jokic was like this in the series against us in Minnesota, where he was making these turnovers. It's like, man, what's going on with him? I think a lot of times of the ball handlers that I've seen over the years, that's kind of a symptom of, oh, this guy is tired. And so I think it was a mix of that, but it was something that he improved over the course of the season. But this year's team, I don't think is going to be as built around ball screens. And I think that there is a overriding conversation of the people I talk to with the Lakers that it's like, can you win with an Austin and D'Lo backcourt? That I think the consensus is no. And part of it is because neither guy can be an on-ball creator either throughout the course of 48. I think that's more the skepticism on Austin, or high-level playoff, with D'Lo. And so again, I'm curious what direction that ends up taking Austin in. But again, I think that he got some great reps at this last year to where it's one of the clubs in his bag, so to speak.
So let's talk about individual skill set then, because I think the ability to be an on-ball creator depends on how much you can vary your game with those on-ball skills. To me, a critical shot in Austin's bag is going to need to be the pull-up three coming off of a screen, because that ability to hit that shot at a fairly high level is going to open up other parts of his game that he typically would not have as an on-ball shot creator. Austin was actually better as a off the dribble 3-point shooter than he was as a spot up shooter. And I think that portends well for him over the course of his career if he can hit that shot in the like high 30s. Guys don't hit that shot at the 40% level unless you're like Steph Curry and Dame Lillard. And I honestly don't expect Austin to be that level of shooter. That said, Pete, if Austin can come off a ball screen or even in isolation, hit like sidestep and step back threes at a level that makes the defense like react to him in a certain way, I think he has enough downhill juice and plays with enough verve that he can then get into the gaps of the defense or attack closeouts in a way and use hesitation moves and things like that in order to get to spots on the floor that belie his individual athleticism. But he needs to shoot the ball to me at a high level, and that needs to start at the beginning of the year and not come later in the year, if that makes sense.
It does, and his 3-ball is good, but it's not consistent, right? There have been several streaks throughout his career where it's been like Austin's like 2 for 20 over the last several games. And that's part of basketball. But again, I do think that it speaks to a level of is maybe a little more of an on-ball guy than an off.
Yeah, it does. But if you're going to be an on-ball player who can't get downhill like a Donovan Mitchell, then you need the jumper.
You do. He's got it from mid-range. Like one of the things that he does well is he can shoot those kind of contorting, twisting 12-footers where you're moving across your body or squaring up when you're midair, right?
Well, he's a great reverse pivot shooter as well. So he can always go strong right hand, play off 2 feet sort of player. And I think that's one of Austin's strengths is the ability to play off 2 feet. His shot making off of the dribble, to me, 15 feet and in is very good. He's got a great floater game. He can do a lot of different things. But the pull-up long jumper is an important shot for a guard of his profile.
I think there's a question before the pull-up jumper in that it's how does he deal with ball pressure? And what are the Lakers' answers around that, right? Where the thing that I don't like and that so much of last year's team was predicated on was you're going to beat your guy off the dribble if they get up into your jersey. And that is a way to beat players, but it's not the only way. And one of the other ways that we rarely used was, or at least didn't use enough, in my opinion, were pressure release type of stuff where you throw the ball to a flashing big that, flashes to the top of the key or to the free throw line. And then Austin cuts off of that. And so there are opportunities off of that. He can be a good cutter. Anyway, I think that there are solutions to where you can play him at the 1 and still, if they want a ball pressure, you can play around that we didn't really, we only really scratched the surface of last season.
Scratch the surface implies that they were doing it at all. Pete, they weren't doing any of that.
It happened. There's tape. But I get your point. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's like it wasn't option. If we're going A through Z, it was like that's like in the LMNOP area of like how often they're actually deploying that. And so let's go to break here because I think this is the merging of 5-out offense and what Austin is good at that I think can take his game to the next level. One of the things I like about Austin is that he can be a good hand fighter and that he can be deceptive and he can play to his size. So Austin's 6'5". He's not the biggest, strongest dude, but he's a big guard. He knows how to put guys in jail. He knows how to play with guys on his hip. He knows how to get his shot off in those situations as an on-ball player. The stuff that you're talking about, Pete, is the next level of 5-out offense that I also think that he can be good at. But it's not always common for a guy who is comfortable with the ball in his hands to have the ball, get off the ball, and then move. It's like not a natural thing. Watch the James Hardens, Trae Youngs, Luka Doncic's, like watch those guys play. They get off the ball and they back up again. Mm-hmm. They don't often take a hard step in to you like they're a wide receiver trying to beat a press coverage. And this is the idea that you're talking about with Austin. And I think that the quicker he adapts to that style of play and being able to do that is going to unlock so many things for him, because he is smart enough to read the game in that way. And and if the Lakers are truly going to play in a hub style offense where AD is a hub or potentially LeBron as a hub, those guys are going to serve as pressure release players, very similar to what like Miami does with Bam. And then Austin has enough juice in his game to be a guy who can like shove you off and then get into a downhill cut. He can feint the downhill cut and then flare and get off. He can roll into a dribble handoff, which turns into a pick and roll opportunity. He has all of these skills in his skill set, but playing in an offense that is actually going to ask those things of him and hold him accountable for doing them, I think is the way to unlock all of these parts of his game where he can jump from a 13, 14, 15 point a game scorer to a 17, 18, 19 point a game scorer with good efficiency, because he's a good finisher in and around the paint. And these are the parts of his game that can unlock more of those chances where he didn't get a lot of those in previous seasons because it's all go beat your guy. Mm-hmm. And he's just like, wait, beat my guy. These dudes are 6'7" with long arms and like super athletic at the point of attack.
A lot of times that was a ball screen, though. That was is a way to do it, right? And so Austin was in the top 15 in terms of pick and roll volume in the NBA last season. And so he got a lot of reps and he got pretty good at it, or at least a lot better than where he was at the beginning of the season. And so that style of, hey, instead of trying to beat this with a ball screen, because you're not always going to. And that's one of the great things about basketball is that there's always a way to stop a tactic with a different tactic. And so you have to at least have counters. And so against the defenses or defenders that can jam him up. Now, this is one of the big questions for me about this type of style, D, is can Austin and D'Lo get off of the jam coverage, right? Like if you watch NFL football, cornerbacks will defend wide receivers this way, where they'll get right up to the line of scrimmage, and when the ball is snapped, they're going to get right into their jersey and not let them get space. That's the scouting report for both Austin and D'Lo. And so examples where we've seen that style of offense, most famous obviously is Steph and Clay. At least Clay is big, right? It's hard to jam up Clay. And so what do you think of that idea, D, of that, like, can they play off ball together? I think they can. I'm being a little bit devil's advocate here, but that is a worry that I have, is that kind of bigger teams will be able to jam us up.
You should be worried about this.
Yeah.
Now, to be fair, in the NBA, freedom of movement rules still do exist. And depending on how tightly or not the refs are calling the game, it can influence whether or not you can jam a guy and just hold him up in this way. That said, one of the reasons why Steph has maintained this level of elite play as a guy who has to move off of the ball a bunch is because he got stronger. And as he aged, he's like, you're not just going to hold me and me not be able to like fight you off some and then create separation in all of these different ways that once he gets his momentum going, he is very hard to track. This is where I will now go back to the physical preparation side of Austin. I think as critical as it is that Austin trains his legs to be able to play in a style where his jumper doesn't get lost in the idea that it's the fourth game in 6 nights and I've had to do all of this heavy lifting on both sides of the ball. I think that from an upper body strength standpoint, he needs to get stronger in a way where he can fend off these players, and that if they try to body him and hold him, he has the wherewithal to say like, no, I'm going to parry this. I'm going to get into your body. I'm going to move you off of me. And then I'm going to make you ride in the sidecar to a certain extent, not to LeBron levels, but you know what I mean, where you're not just going to be able to halt my momentum. And that's where I hope Austin can get to. D'Lo too, to a certain extent, but D'Lo to me, it's different for D'Lo. He is such a great off-ball shooter. He's such a good shooter as a spot-up guy that he can do way more off-ball stuff and be a threat as like a flare screener and a guy who cuts and all of this stuff that Austin doesn't quite have that level of shooting to him. And I think it's a little bit of a different equation for D'Lo, but maybe I'm wrong.
Would it be galaxy-brained to kind of flip their roles, where Austin is thought of as more the one and D'Lo as more of the shooter? I'm working on this video right now. I'm just because I want to make fun little videos and go down memory lane. I'm making these compilation videos for YouTube of like an hour of LeBron's best assists with the Lakers, or AD 11 times that AD ended the game with his defense. And I'm putting together one of D'Lo's most memorable threes with the Lakers. Was working on that this morning. And at the end of his rookie year, I think it was, or it might have been the second year. We switched to a motion weak style offense, which is a like San Antonio style, but it's a motion offense. And D'Lo was like coming off ball screens and looked really comfortable at doing that. And he was an off ball player to a great extent, to where this style of offense that we're talking about now, I'm like watching this video this morning going like, oh, that's right. D'Lo did do this for a stretch for us, that in a less ball screen heavy style offense. So what do you think of that idea of like Austin being more of the one, whereas D'Lo was last year, and D'Lo being more of the two?
I think that these are great ideas. I also wonder, are both of them twos? And another guy who wasn't supposed to be a point guard anymore this season under Coach JJ Redick ends up being more point guard than ever, the way that he was on the Olympic team. And an idea that I've been floating around in my head is, for all the talk about LeBron moving him off of the ball in order to save him, what happens if you actually give him more on-ball reps? That doesn't mean you inbound to him in the backcourt, because teams will then try to pressure him full court, and they'll put a live body athlete on him, and they will do the same things to LeBron that they try to do to Austin and D'Lo. It's not always as effective because of how strong LeBron still is, but it's a lot of work to be a full court ball handler. But this is why the idea of a hub offense intrigues me, because a hub offense naturally diminishes the ball handling responsibilities of almost every player and flattens it out across all five guys that are out there, but particularly your big players. Because what you're able to do is you're able to lift your bigs higher up on the floor in order to deter rim protection at the basket, and use those guys as ball handlers and screeners and passers at the top of the floor. There's maybe no big player in the league that's better at that than LeBron James. You could talk about Jokic, and I get it. You can talk about Sabonis. Sabonis is great at this as well. It's like a DHO guy. But neither of those guys are LeBron James in terms of like, oh, I could also just shot create from here because I've been one of the greatest shot creators ever as an on-ball player. And look, I'm all for Austin getting more opportunities as the one and being more of a ball handler type, or having the ball in his hands to start possessions more within the context of this type of an offense. I'm also down to be like, yeah, you know what both of you guys do pretty well is this. We can move you off of the ball. We can put you on spots of the floor where you're coming off of DHOs, or you are the recipient of a swing where you can attack a closeout or shoot an open three or run second side actions. And that's where I think you can find synergy between D'Lo and Austin as offensive players, right? Which I already think D'Lo and Austin as offensive players can really complement each other well. I think where you start to have questions about whether or not you can win at the highest level with these guys is on the defense. It's on the defensive side of the ball. D'Lo's playoff struggles notwithstanding, right? If D'Lo could sustain his level of regular season production through the playoffs with, I don't want to say fewer dips, because every player is going to have their ups and downs, but like his floor just needs to be higher. And that's a D'Lo conversation. But with Austin, like, I sort of like his ability to be both an on-ball and an off-ball player. And it's that versatility that I think makes him a tricky scout for opposing teams, because you can, at some parts of the game, Pete, just give him the ball for 5 straight minutes and say, like, go do it. And that's a different thing defensively to prepare for than the guy who's doing off-ball work or is going to be in the corner a fair amount. And the fact that Austin can be both is a challenge for opposing teams. But he also needs to understand like how to strike the right balance and how to play out of all of those spots. And that's where I thought last year was a great like learning year for Austin.
And to your point, I think one of the first steps is going to be clarifying his role with Redick. And I think that that's probably already happened. And he's made some comments, and his agent tweeted, you know, you're going to see a different version of Austin this year, or something along those lines, that indicated that, you know, there's been some conversation about what that will look like. So because you got to give the player like, hey, this is how I envision using you this year, so they can work on those aspects of their game right now. Because it's different if you're asking him to run 1,000 ball screens versus using swim moves to beat ball denial after you've passed the ball to LeBron at the top of the key, right? It's a different technique to work on. And so just it helps the player kind of mentally get ready for the season. Last thing, do you agree with that idea of that kind of Austin and D'Lo are ultimately ill-fated? Like even if under the best of circumstances, say you calibrate everything the way that you need to, the rest of the roster is good to go. But do you think that it's sort of a fatal flaw?
Fatal flaw might be too strong, but it's certainly on closer to that side than it is like, I feel super confident that this group can work. The thing is that if you are going to depend on D'Angelo Russell and Austin Reaves to be high-level contributors in a deep playoff run, and you have a 39-year-old LeBron James on your roster, and then you have Anthony Davis as well, who has long said, you know, what I kind of like is having another dude help me lift the couch, then almost the entirety of the rest of your roster needs to be constructed in a very specific way in order to account for the fact that you need athletes and motor and hustle, and these guys can't just be one-side players. They need to be good to very good on defense. That's a given, but offensively, they can't be zeros either. We've talked about Vando within this context and finding the right role for Vando offensively. I think both you and I are cautiously optimistic that they can find those avenues, but if it went the other direction, I don't think either of us would be surprised, right? That said, it's like you need more players like that than this roster presently has. And that's the tricky thing. I think we are projecting Max Christie to be able to do some of that. I think we are projecting Gabe Vincent to be able to do some of that. But to me, they're still like a forward and or another big man short in that range. And it's just like when we talk about Rui, for example, which will be a pod down the line, this is where on this team, it's like Rui and D'Lo to me are the guys who butt heads to a certain extent.
Oh, interesting.
Because they are the guys who are and can be high-level offensive performers that really complement your stars in very specific ways. But defensively, they don't have everything you'd want for the players who play at their positions. And so, how stable is your offense? And if your offense falls a certain level, if it falls below a certain level of stability, then how valuable are you actually, even if we all understand that you're a very good player overall? And it's a tricky thing. And so when you talk about D'Lo and Austin, a guy that I'm sort of looking at who's off to the side a little bit is like, you know who plays a part in this is that guy. And it's Rui to me, to a certain extent. Now, that's a different conversation for a different day. So I don't think it's a fatal flaw, but I do think you need to set your roster up in a very specific way in order to account for that being a thing that you're relying on.
I think it's so specific that it may as well be from a practical standpoint, especially in a league where making moves is more difficult than ever. And so I do think that they'll have to break that up if they want to go all the way. But again, another discussion for another time. We will be back on Friday, going to solicit some questions on Patreon for a mailbag on Friday. But until then, you've been listening to Laker Film Room Podcast. We'll catch you guys next time.
James has got it in low to McHale. McHale wants to turn. He's double teamed. Just pass out in front. Broken up by Worthy. Tip to Magic. Worthy dies on his belly. Magic scores.
There's Magic got it. Magic fires. It's good. They will. Lakers win the game. The Lakers win the game. Rebound of Lonnie. 3 seconds left. Van Exel to win it. It's on the way. Good.
Kobe Bryant, 48 points, 16 rebounds. Shot with his 8th block shot that ties an NBA Finals record.
A lot of Laker fans sticking around for this.
You're seeing something that's very rare indeed. A Laker to get MVP chance.
Right, in Boston.
In Boston.
Of all places.
Are you kidding me?
Kobe, hard to believe.
Are you kidding me? Unreal. Are you kidding me?
Lakers looking to push. Bryant spinning in the lane. Back for Gasol. Pretty pass. And it's back to a 3-point game.
Kobe Bryant picked up by Bell.
There's the move. 2, 1.
Miss it.
Unbelievable. For the victory. It's over.
Shot clock now to 5. Bryant. Yes. And that was a little tap to Alvin Gentry.
Add insult to injury, Kobe. I mean, what a shot. I mean, you can't defend that. Are you kidding me?
2.1 seconds remaining. Denver a foul to give. Jokic trying to disrupt Rondo. He puts it in. Here's Davis, 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good! Anthony Davis has won it for the Lakers! James again. Oh, he hits another one. LeBron James putting together a closing quarter against the Nuggets.
This historic 2020 NBA championship belongs to the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers conquer the bubble, and banner number 17 will soon hang in the rafters.